From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. We are delving into a true, unsolved mystery today. If you're a younger person, you might not have heard of John Parsons Wheeler III unless you saw the recent Netflix reboot of Unsolved Mysteries. It's a story that largely disappeared from mass media headlines in a very weird way. I mean, you've heard of Elisa Lam, but have you heard of John Parsons Wheeler? Here are the facts. First things first, whether or not you have ever heard of this man, if you live in the U.S., his career has probably impacted you in some way. He's one of those guys who, it seems like since his early days, he was destined for the heights of the military political class.
Oh, yeah, an absolute heavyweight and a sharp guy to boot. John Parsons Wheeler III, Jack to his pals, was born on December 14th, 1944 in Laredo, Texas. And he was, to some degree, kind of destined to follow in the footsteps of those that came before him in his family line, and was, in fact, groomed for the type of illustrious political and military career many would only ever dream of. He came from a long line of these career military men, including one relative who served in both the Confederate Army and then later the United States Army.
Yeah, he ended up going to the U.S. Military Academy, which you may know as West Point. That's the way it's generally referred to. Very prestigious place if you were going to go that route. Then he was a fire control platoon leader in New Jersey, back in the mid to late 60s, and he ended up getting a Bachelor of Science degree from that institution.
Yeah, important note about his classmates, his cohort at West Point. Many of these men would go on to lose their lives in Vietnam, and his experiences with the war had a tremendous influence on his career, his personal beliefs, and possibly debatably the end of his life. This class at West Point is documented in a book written by a former Washington Post journalist named Rick Atkinson. The name of the book is The Long Gray Line. This book spends a lot of time on Wheeler himself, if you read it, and Wheeler had a copy of it at his home. He served as a staff officer in Vietnam. He served with the Office of the Secretary of Defense. He served with the Joint Staff before he left service in 1971. His schooling is particularly interesting because it was his gateway to the upper echelons of American society. He enrolled in Harvard Business School in '69, got a master's in business admin. He got a degree in law from Yale in '75, and he worked with fancy law firms in D.C., the ones that kind of blur the line between private and public power. They're often called white shoe law firms. You may hear them referred to as such. He served as a clerk for George E. McKinnon. He was a high-level official for the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission. This guy had his finger in a lot of pies. He was During his time at the SEC, side note, he was investigating major cases of insider trading. So, long story short, he was accepted by the often invisible ruling class of this country, and he moved extensively in this circle.
Well, and he's also, if anyone knew of his work, if you're imagining the people on the other side of those investigations, he was already potentially making enemies. Just putting it out there.
Yeah, great point, Matt. Let's talk a little bit about his career, because the space he occupies is a bit alien, I think, to a lot of the general public. You could describe him as a defense consultant, but that is a very vague term.
Yeah, it seems almost like a gray area, kind of where it could encompass a whole lot of things that maybe aren't public knowledge.
Yeah, exactly, Noel. So he was known for working in that often unexamined liminal space between the feds and private companies, and then charities and nonprofits. And of course, as longtime listeners know, some of those organizations, not all, but some of them are much more closely related than they would have you believe, according to, their FAQs on their websites. Uh, for most of the people in the US, Wheeler's most notable, well-known work is his assistance in the construction of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in D.C. in 1984. He's instrumental in making that happen. He worked for a cavalcade of different institutions and organizations: Amtrak, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, three different Republican administrations, Reagan, and then Bush, and then Bush again when that guy put his son into office. And he also worked for the MITRE Corporation. Remember that last one. It's going to be important later. His career was not without controversy, especially moving in and out of so many institutions. Maybe we can talk a little bit about his roles with charities and with businesses as well.
Yeah, sure. He was extremely active in various nonprofits. I think that's probably the way to put it. Very specialized nonprofits. And he was the founder and CEO of this thing called Vietnam Children's Fund. By many accounts, at least if you look online, appears to be a great organization, at least the forward-facing things about it. He worked with President Bush, like we said, the father, to create this thing called the Earth Conservation Corps. He also served as president and CEO of the Deafness Research Foundation. I mean, just listen to what we're saying here. This man was nonstop working with organizations that appear to be for the greater good. At least that's the way it seems. He also had a really solid rep for, this is great, a solid rep for turning failing businesses around. Now, that sounds great, right, on paper, but when you turn a failing business around, like, what does that really mean?
Right.
Like, what do you have to do to turn a failing business around?
It's when you start hearing like corporate buzzwords like pivot,
Yeah, and it could be, and it could be everything from specializing in, making a company specialize in one small thing that is a profit center and then getting rid of a whole bunch of other things that a company does, such as the case with Macy's. Macy's, you'll remember from the mall when you were a kid, and some places now, I think they're Macy's, unless they're all gone. I can't remember. But he turned that business around. He got him out of bankruptcy.
Right, which may have entailed layoffs. That's the elephant in the room, the badger in the bag there, under euphemisms like streamlining, pivoting, or focusing. But he did manage to right the ship. Small note about Vietnam Children's Fund, by the way, they build elementary schools in Vietnam, and they do a pretty great job at it. They're still around. If you want to learn more, you can just find them online. But perhaps the most unpredictable aspect of Wheeler's post-military career was this late-stage professional plot twist. He was well into his 60s when he developed an intense interest in cybersecurity, and that's what led him to the MITRE Corporation. It also turned him into one of those guys who always has a briefcase. Inexplicably, always has a briefcase.
And what's in there? Huh? Who knows?
No telling. No, literally, we don't know. But behind the scenes, we have to realize that this person was a human being, and he struggled with his own demons. He suffered from depression and bipolar disorder. That's not speculation. He received a diagnosis in this regard, and this resulted in these bouts of frenetic action and then unpredictable, at times drastic mood swings. But, who's perfect? And given his...
Well, he's clearly a workaholic, right? And I'm sure in many ways that helped him. At least if you watched I think we mentioned it, the Unsolved Mysteries episode, as well as you read online stuff that has been written by his wife, he thrived quite a bit from that energy that he got, not necessarily from bipolar disorder, but just that existed within him inherently.
Right, right. Someone defining themselves by their continual actions, right? There must always be a goal to pursue. He's not really a kick back and smell the morning dew with a nice hot cup of coffee kind of guy. He's got stuff to do. But given his track record and given the success and the benefits of the work he does, his legacy seems assured until one strange day in November. Very last day of 2010, December 31st, there are some workers at the Cherry Island landfill near Wilmington, Virginia. They see the body of an elderly man plummet from the back of a garbage truck onto a heap of trash. This turns out to be the body of John Parsons Wheeler III. He was 66 years old. Today's episode, what happened? Here's where it gets crazy. Officially, this death has been ruled a homicide. However, it is a homicide that comes with a lot of unanswered questions. And the further you dig into this story, the stranger it becomes. So maybe we start with the relevant details. Should we start with the landfill? What do you think?
I think that's a perfect place to start. When these workers found Wheeler's body, he had the look of having been severely beaten. He was wearing a white shirt, black pants, and a black jacket. And an important detail, he was wearing a class of 1966 ring from the West Point Military Academy. And the thing that was unusual about it is that he still had things like that clearly very valuable ring that any average street mugger would have taken. Not to mention the absolute lack of care that went into, quote, disposing of this body. I mean, it was really just dumped in plain view.
Well, yeah, we're going to talk about this later on, but just to end up where his body ended up, it was either someone taking great care to put a body in a dumpster and hope that it would never be discovered again, because it is actually quite unlikely that they would have discovered him amongst all the trash that was dumped that day from the truck. The other side of the coin is, if his body was dumped by somebody or just put into a dumpster like that, you're right that there's a lack of care in that. I don't know. It's weird. It's both sides, right? It's a lack of care, but it's also, it appears to show intent, I guess, if someone actually did put him in there to try and hide a body.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's alarmingly easy to dispose of an organism in a landfill, especially a large one. You have to work out the timing. And you have to, like the day of the week when a lot of dumps come in, things like that. This should not be confused or mistaken as advice on where to put bodies. We are not giving you that. We are saying that the average, I would say not pre-planned or orchestrated mugging or murder doesn't usually result in the perpetrator having the presence of mind to dispose of the body. You know what I mean? If you are robbing someone, the robbery goes wrong, and you stab them, wound them, maim them, or shoot them, your first instinct is going to be to leave the scene immediately, rather than sit around and think, hey, should I stash this in some bushes, Assassin's Creed style or something like that? It doesn't often happen that way. So Wilmington is on the case. Authorities contact the police in Newcastle, Delaware, where the Wheeler family has a second home. And the Virginia police informed the Delaware police of this. A few days earlier, just after Christmas, around December 28th, Wheeler had told his wife he had to spend a few days working on an important project at the Mitre Corporation. He told her he'd be staying at the Metropolitan Club in downtown Washington, And they argued about this. We know they argued. This is not speculation because we can see the email and text records. And he was emphasizing this was important. He even talked to his therapist about the argument. He was trying to smooth things out diplomatically until the point that he fell completely out of contact with her. And then police found a series of phone calls that made this seem like more than an accidental death or a mugging.
That's right, but more than, offering any real solutions, it just raised a significant number of new questions to the circumstances surrounding Wheeler's death. One call from December 28th, the day Wheeler traveled to Washington, D.C., came from a resident of Newcastle named Scott Morris, who saw at 11:30 p.m. what he described as, quote, the darkened silhouette of a man standing in the frame of the house under construction across the street, methodically lighting what looked like small balls of fire and tossing them onto the floor. Really descriptive and kind of eerie. The police called to the scene, didn't find any damage of note, but Morris remained disturbed by what he saw. The sense of desperation and the purpose of what was going on in this scene really stuck with him. He described it as creepy. He says the figure appeared very calm, and when he finished, he turned very deliberately and walked away toward the path along the Delaware River.
Yeah, so we know the thing about eyewitness accounts is that they're essentially combo meals, right? The main entree in these combo meals is going to be the factual description of what happened. But the side order, the fries and the drink, are the person's own perspective and opinion put upon what they saw. So yes, for Morris, this appears to be purposeful. He somehow, from body language, because he didn't speak to this person, he somehow believed or got the sense that they were quite deliberate. But that doesn't necessarily mean they are, because he didn't talk to them, right? And he didn't see who it was. That's a hugely important detail here. But another hugely important detail, that construction site was something Wheeler was involved in an antagonistic way. He was part of an ongoing legal dispute over the construction of this particular house. And he was going hard on the paint too. He hated the idea of it being built. Partially, yes, it would block his home's view of the land and the water. But from his perspective, at least the way he explained it, the area was historic because back in the day, early colonists and then later revolutionaries built a defense battery on that land. So to him, building anything on that land other than perhaps a monument to those earlier forces was profoundly offensive. It was a kind of sacrilege. But then we have to ask ourselves, was that sincere, or was that just like his rationalization for this construction that he hated? You know what I mean? Anyway,
Yeah,
he was involved.
Well, he was involved, and he was trying to stop it. His wife says that he was essentially on a mission to stop this thing. And we know from his past life and his actions, everything that he's done, he sees something as a goal and he goes for it. And that's like, again, like his mission, right? So you can imagine that he was feeling very, very strongly about this. And from what I've read, this incident appears to have been like smoke bombs that didn't seem to cause any damage really to the house, didn't seem to cause anything else besides this disturbance. But the weird thing is that John Wheeler's cellular phone was recovered in that house, the house that was under construction where the silhouetted man or person lighting smoke bombs was found or was seen, let's say. Very strange.
Yeah, even like leaving the accusations of his involvement or his guilt in this instance, leaving those all to the side, the timeline becomes really weird when we think about when he had the phone and when he didn't, how the phone got from him to that place place on the banks there. And then there is another call police discover on December 30th, the day before Wheeler's body is found. There's a guy named Rob Dill, Dill. He is one of the Wheelers' neighbors there in Newcastle, and he reports that someone has broken into the Wheelers' home. I believe he's the same neighbor also who said they had a TV on very loud when he knew there was no one home. He was just doing a thing neighbors do, keeping an eye on the house. He had noticed a window ajar in the Wheeler house, and the exterior door, the storm door, was closed, but the interior door was also ajar. And then he found some weird stuff when he went into the interior. There was a disarray in the kitchen, like somebody had been rooting through things in a hurried manner. John had a ceremonial sword and shield. They were covered with powder by the sink. Rob Dill notices a footprint in powder in front of the sink. And when the police show up, the weird thing is that nothing seems to have been stolen. Stuff was messed with, but no one took expensive electronics. No one took, some of the art that the Wheelers had, the kind of stuff you would normally steal if you were just a garden variety B&E dude. But there was one detail that caught their attention. Amid all this disarray, investigators found a book on the kitchen counter. The book was open, as if someone had been reading it before they left. Can you guess what the book is? If you guessed The Long Gray Line, you are correct.
Yeah, man. And just the fact that his ceremonial sword and shield were hanging out down there. I mean, it's weird. Spices, some comet maybe, or whatever the white substance was, and those things. I don't know. It's weird. It's tough because initially what that sounds like to me is frantically searching for something in your own house and then maybe finding it or not finding it and getting upset and leaving.
Where's the turmeric? Forget this.
or there's something, I've hidden something, or I know I've hidden something, but I'm not sure where it is. I think it might be under the sink, and like just pulling everything frantically out from drawers and from under the sink. I don't know. That's what it sounds like to me. Mm-hmm. Rather, like, as you said, for all the reasons you've already stated, Ben, rather than someone going into the house and robbing it, unless they were just trying to leave a message of some sort. I don't know.
Right. Unless there was possibly someone from his past, right? This is the thing. We don't know what page the book was on, when it was open. Was it indicating a specific, somehow significant passage? Unknown at this time. But then also we see an alternate possibility that maybe Wheeler himself is panicked or he's hurried for some reason, because when people are hurrying from their own house, they don't always close the windows or the doors, right? Because the logic is, it's my house, I'll just come back into it, right? So the initial investigations tell us increasingly strange things. On January 3rd, just a few days after the discovery of his body, UPI reported Wheeler's death was ruled a homicide, but a friend of his that he knew through the legal circles he moved in noted, this is just not the kind of guy who gets murdered. This is not the kind of guy you find in a landfill. But the official cause of death, again, is homicide, and that was specified in several obituaries that came out shortly after.
So according to his obituary in the Washington Post, I'll just read you a quote. Quote, the cause of death was blunt force trauma inflicted by unknown assailants in Wilmington, Delaware, not far from his home in Newcastle, Delaware. But as these investigations continued, many more troubling details started to rise to the surface. Wheeler seemed to not only have been beaten, but beaten to the point of like the beating inducing a heart attack. You can only imagine. And several eyewitnesses would report that Wheeler had been seen in really rough shape, holding a shoe, his shoe, stumbling around under duress in Wilmington, Delaware. He was telling people in this Unsolved Mysteries that we talked about at the top of the show, they interview some of the folks that saw him. And he claimed to have lost his briefcase, or rather even more so, had it stolen.
Yeah, that's what he told a parking lot attendant, that it was stolen from him.
And he kept repeating it like he was in some kind of fugue state, whether it's suffering from some sort of mental breakdown or just dazed from having been attacked or and disheveled and all that. But it really does, the plot does thicken. There's some footage you can see. He's on camera from his kind of, wander, and you can see that he's just kind of pacing around frantically. He's holding the shoe. It almost looks like he's mumbling to himself. He looks very disoriented on these CCTV videos, and he claims to have been robbed and needed a ride out of town.
Yeah. And this is my side note here, but when you first look at the footage, you see an elderly man that does appear to be out of sorts for one reason or another. And in my mind, initially, what I see is disorientation, like a disoriented person. I don't know where I am. I'm confused about what's going on and why I'm here. That's what it looks like. But according to people who knew him well, there's several interviews outside of that Unsolved Mysteries show that include his wife and several people that knew him, and his wife speaking about others' words. But they all say that he looked in distress, as though he was, what did they, I think, Ben, you kind of put it that way, hunting or being hunted, essentially, like he was in distress for one reason or another. That's their opinion.
Right. Yeah. And that's a phrase we'll use later in the episode, because it does encapsulate exactly how he was behaving. And again, we see the issue with eyewitness reports. People are putting their own perspective over the events, or it's a better way to say it is they're seeing the same events through the lens of their own perspective and their preconceptions. Here's the thing. This doesn't appear to have come out of nowhere, because email records show that on December 29th, he had contacted his colleagues at the MITRE Corporation reporting a home break-in. He said that his cell phone had been stolen, his badge, his ID badge, his security fob, and his briefcase. There's a mystery here. We know his records for cab calls. We have interviews with cab drivers who spoke with him. We know his records for emails and text. But after he reported his phone being stolen, it's not clear where he was sending these other emails from or how he was sending them. Was it an internet cafe or something like that? We simply do not know. There are no further reports of him until 6 p.m. when he walked into the nearby Happy Harry's pharmacy. This was like his, it's like his CVS or his Walgreens down the street, or Rite Aid, I guess, depending on where you live. Dwayne Reed, if you're in New York. Yep. I'm just naming pharmacies at this point, but he knows the people who work there. He is friends with one of the pharmacists, and he comes in and he asks this guy if he can get a ride to Wilmington. And multiple times people try to offer him assistance, and for varying reasons, he always turns the assistance down. It's strange. So then he spotted. Oh, sorry.
Did we talk about why he wants to go to Wilmington? At least according to that documentary or that Unsolved Mysteries episode, it's because his car was parked somewhere, where he left his car parked somewhere, and he wanted to go find it, but he wasn't quite sure where it is. And according to his wife and others, he was constantly losing his car essentially after he would park it.
Yeah, DC is a tough place to park in. I mean, a lot of the Northeast in general, but also he was doing something that I think will be familiar to a lot of people who park their car for a long time during quarantine. He just hadn't been around his car for a minute, right?
Yeah.
So he wasn't quite sure where he put it. The important thing here is that losing your car in that way is not indicative of an unwell mental state.
Yes.
But
And that's the story that he was giving to people for the reason to get to that area. But I don't know, we can't definitively prove that's why he needed to get to Wilmington.
right. Just that's what he said to some people, but not all. That's a very good point. So he looks particularly rough when he's in one parking lot talking to this parking attendant. He has one shoe on, the other is ripped and in his hand. And it turns out that he is in the wrong deck. His car is in a different nearby parking deck. He eventually leaves the scene. There are no further sightings of him until December 30th, when he visits a high rise to speak with a senior partner at a law firm. He leaves before he actually meets with this person, but he also, according to someone else in the office, asked for money to take the train somewhere before he left.